Why is it so hard to find an employer to sponsor me for an H-1B visa? Hi, I'm Jim Hacking, immigration lawyer practicing law around the United States out of our office here in St. Louis, Missouri. Every spring we get contacted by students and international workers who are wondering, why is it just so hard to find an employer to sponsor me for an H-1B? We decided to shoot this video to try to educate you as to some of the things that go into an employer's mind when considering whether or not to hire an international worker for an H-1B visa. The first thing to keep in mind is that there's a lot of paperwork and a lot of headache for the employer who wants to sponsor someone for an H-1B. There's a lot of details regarding the company, their financials, their ability to pay, and there's a lot of questions that are asked and information that has to be gathered about the employee themselves. So, you're dealing with the federal government, a bureaucratic organization, USCIS, and the Department of Labor, so you're actually dealing with two federal agencies, and there are a lot of nitpicky procedural type things that an employer may just want to throw their hands up and say, I'm not doing this, this is too much of a hassle. Of course, whenever you're talking about forms and gathering documents, you're also talking about cost. So every employer has to spend a lot of money on the fees associated with an H-1B. And I'm not trying to scare any employers, I'm not trying to say that this isn't worth it, I'm just trying to explain how the process works and why that hurdle is so high for an international student or a worker to get that H-1B. So one of the things to keep in mind is that the employer is going to end up spending around $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 depending on the legal fees and on whether or not they want to apply for premium processing. So there are a lot of government fees that have to be paid at the very beginning of the process, and so cost is certainly a factor. One thing to keep in mind is those fees have to be paid by the employer. The employee can't pay the employer back. That's illegal, and employers and employees have both gotten in trouble for that, so don't do that. But that means that the ball is completely in the employer's court. They have to pay it. Another thing associated with cost is that as part of the H-1B process, the employer has to promise the federal government that they will pay the employee the prevailing wage. What's the prevailing wage? This means that the employer does a survey of the area in which the job will be performed, and we help with that. It's not that complicated, but you have to promise to pay whatever the average wage is for that salary based on the skill level in that area. So for instance, if it's a computer programmer in St. Louis County, you would look what's a software developer, what's a middle level wage for that, and then the employer has to promise to pay that wage. They have to certify that to the Department of Labor. Another thing to keep in mind is that the employer also has to meet with the immigration attorney, meet with the employees, and do a lot of legwork, like I mentioned earlier, in order to be able to sponsor them. Another issue is the lottery. So this is probably the biggest hindrance and hurdle for the employer in considering whether or not to sponsor the employee. And so how does the lottery work? Well, last year there were 225,000 H-1B visa applications for roughly 65,000 slots and 20,000 for people with master's degrees. So Congress has capped the number of H-1Bs available every year at 65,000. The number hasn't grown in quite some time, even though the demand for these visas is very high. So what does that mean? That means 1 out of every 3 or so applications last year got selected. The other 2 got opened up, got assigned a case number, got closed back up, and shipped back to the employer. There's no inquiry into the merits of the application. It doesn't matter how badly the employee wants to stay or how badly the employer wants to hire the person. It truly is a lottery. And a lot of these visas are taken up by some of these companies that just do a ton of staffing, and many of the visas go to a very few number of companies. So this is another big hurdle for the employer in considering whether or not to do this. So these are some of the reasons why it really is that difficult to get that H-1B visa. It's certainly not something that people want to hear, but at the same time, I don't want you to think it's impossible. Every year, employers contact us, and they've had a student or a worker that they're considering. A lot of times the student will have been with them on optional practical training, OPT, as part of their F1 visa. After graduation, they get to work for a certain period of time for the employer, and we've had plenty of situations where an employer has come to us and said, Jim, this person is such a rock star that I'm absolutely willing to go through all that headache and cost that I just mentioned in order to be able to sponsor and keep this employee. Don't think it doesn't happen. It happens all the time. Every year it happens, so it can certainly happen to you. if you make yourself so distinguishable and so valuable to the employer that they're willing to go through this. So if you have questions about the H1b process or why it's so difficult, or if you have an employer who's considering sponsoring you for an H1b, feel free to give us a call at 314-961-8200. You can check us out on the web at www.hackinglawpractice.com. If you like this video, we have a lot of H1b videos and a lot of videos about general immigration content in general. We like to update our videos about twice a week, so if you want to subscribe, you can click on the subscribe button and you'll get a lot more great content just like this one. And we hope to see you down the road. Thanks a lot.